Hello, I will we continue reading Kampf. Yesterday it was quite a difficult read, to be honest. The vocabulary is difficult, and also the prose seems a bit odd. Maybe the sentence structure, but generally, yesterday Hitler first talked about he was born a bourgeois and had a great education, great social class, and but later on he had the misfortune, or rather, he said that he had the fortune, the good luck to have a taste of penury, to taste a really difficult days when he was a painter. He had to buy books. He had no money to pay for food. He also talked about how Vienna had a division between the really rich aristocrat and the working class, and reproached the he reproached the hypocrite. He reproached the upper class in Vienna for being very hypocritical. They didn't know how to deal with the social class. So I'll continue be reading. When I try today to recall the succession of impressions received during that time, I find that I can do so only with approximate completeness. Here I shall describe only the more essential impressions and those which personally affected me and often staggered me. And I shall mention the few lessons I then learned from this experience. At that time, it was, for the most part, not very difficult to find work because I had to seek work not as a skilled tradesman, but as a so called extra hand ready to take any job that turned up by chance, just for the sake of earning my daily bread. Thus, I found myself in the same situation as all those emigrants who shaked the dust of Europe from their feet. With the cast iron determination to lay the foundations of a new existence in the new world and acquire for themselves a new home. Liberated from all the paralyzing prejudices of class and calling, environment and tradition, they enter any service that opens its door to them, accepting any work that comes their way, filled more and more with the idea that honest work never disgraced anybody, no matter what kind it may be. And so I was resolved to set both feet in what was for me a new world and push forward on my own road. I soon found out that there was some kind of work always to be got, but I also learned that it could just as quickly and easily be lost. The uncertainty of being able to earn a regular daily livelihood soon appeared to me as the gloomiest feature in this new life that I had entered. Although the skilled worker was not so frequently thrown idle on the streets as the unskilled worker, yet the former was by no means protected against the same fate, because though he may not have to face hunger as a result of unemployment due to the lack of demand in the labor market, the lockout and the strike deprived the skilled worker of the chance to earn his bread. Here, the element of uncertainty in steadily earning one's daily bread was the bitterest feature of the whole socio-economic system itself. The country lad the country lad who migrates to the big city feels attracted by what has been described as easy work, which it may be in reality and few working hours. He is especially entranced by the magic glimmer spread over the big cities. Accustomed in the country to earn a steady wage, he has been taught not to quit his former post until a new one is at least in sight. As there is a great scarcity of agricultural labor, the probability of long unemployment in the country has been very small. It is a mistake to presume that the lad who leaves the countryside for the town is not made of such sound material as those who remain at home to work on the land. On the contrary, experience shows that it is the more healthy and more vigorous that emigrate, not the reverse. Among these emigrants, I include not merely those who emigrate to America, but also the servant boy in the country who decides to leave his native village and migrate to the big city where he will be a stranger. He's ready to take the risk of an uncertain fate. In most cases, he comes to town with a little money in his pocket. And for the first few days, he is not discouraged if he should not have the good fortune to find work. To find But if he finds a job and then loses it in a little while, the case is much worse. To find work anew, especially in winter, is often difficult and indeed sometimes impossible. For the first few weeks, life is still bearable. He receives his out of work money from his trade union and is thus enabled to carry on. But when the last of his own money is gone and his trade union ceases to pay out because of the prolonged unemployment, then comes the real distress. He now loiters about and is hungry. Often he pawns or sells the last of his own belongings. His clothes begin to get shabby, and with the increasing poverty of his outward appearance, he descends to a lower social level and mixes up with a class of human beings through whom his mind is now poisoned, in addition to his physical misery. Then he has nowhere to sleep, and if that happens in winter, which is very often the case, he is in dire distress. Finally, he gets work, but the old story repeats itself. A second time, the same thing happens, then a third time, and now it is probably much worse. Little by little, he becomes indifferent to this everlasting insecurity. Finally, he grows used to the repetition. Thus, even a man who is normally of industrious habits grows callous in his whole attitude towards life and gradually becomes an instrument in the hands of unscrupulous people who exploit him for the sake of their own ignoble aims. He has been so often thrown out of employment through no fault of his own that he is now more or less indifferent whether the strike in which he takes part be for the purpose of securing his economic rights or be aimed at the destruction of the state, the whole social order, and even civilization itself. Though the idea of going on strike may not be to his natural liking, yet he joins in it out of sheer indifference. I saw this process exemplified before my eyes in thousands of cases, and the longer I observed it, the greater became my dislike for that mammoth city which greedily attracts man to its bosom. In order to break them mercilessly in the end. When they came, they still felt themselves in communion with their own people at home. If they remained, that tie was broken. I was thrown about so much in the life of the metropolis that I experienced the workings of this fate in my own person and felt the effects of it in my own soul. One thing stood out clearly before my eyes. It was the sudden changes from work to idleness and vice versa. So that the constant fluctuations thus caused by earnings and expenditure finally destroy the sense of thrift for many people and also the habit of regulating expenditure in an intelligent way. The body appeared to grow accustomed to the vicissitudes of food and hunger, eating heartily in good times and going hungry in bad. Indeed, Indeed, hunger shatters all plans for rationing expenditure on a regular scale in better times when employment is again found. The reason for this is that the deprivations which the unemployed worker has to endure must be compensated for psychologically by a persistent mental mirage in which he imagines himself eating heartily once again, and this dream develops into such a longing that it turns into a morbid impulse to cast off all self restraint when work and wages turn up again. Therefore, the moment work is found anew, he forgets to regulate the expenditure of his earnings, but spends them to the full without thinking of tomorrow. This leads to confusion in the little weekly housekeeping budget because the expenditure is not rationally planned. When the phenomenon which I've mentioned first happens, the earnings will last perhaps for 5 days instead of 7. On subsequent occasions, they will last only for 3 days. As the habit recurs, the earnings will last scarcely for a day, and finally, they will disappear in one night of feasting. Often there are wife and children at home, and in many cases it happens that these become infected by such a way of living, especially if the husband is good to them and wants to do the best he can for them and loves them in his own way and according to his own likes. Then the week's earnings are spent in common at home within 2 or 3 days. The family eat and drink together as long as the money lasts, and at the end of the week they hunger together. Then the wife wanders about furtively in the neighborhood, borrows a little, and runs up small debts with the shopkeepers in an effort to pull through the lean days towards the end of the week. They sit down together to the midday meal with only meager fare on the table, and often even nothing to eat. They wait for the coming payday, talking of it and making plans, and while they are thus hungry, they dream of the plenty that is to come. And so the little children become acquainted with misery in their early years. But the evil culminates when the husband goes his own way from the beginning of the week and the wife protests, simply out of love for the children. Then there are quarrels and bad feeling, and the husband takes to drink according as he becomes estranged from his wife. He now becomes drunk every Saturday, fighting for her own existence and that of the children. The wife has to haul him along the road from the factory to the tavern in order to get a few shillings from him on payday. Then, when he finally comes home, maybe on a Sunday or the Monday, having parted with his last shillings and pence, pitiable scenes follow. Scenes that cried out for God's mercy. I have had actual experience of all this in hundreds of cases. At first, I was disgusted and indignant, but later on I came to recognize the whole tragedy of their misfortune and to understand the profound causes of it. They were the unhappy victims of evil circumstances. Housing conditions were very bad at the time. The Vienna manual laborers lived in surroundings of appalling misery. Alright, I'll stop here today. Today it seems like much more manageable. The vocabulary it's very descriptive passages regarding the life of people at the time in Vienna. So see you tomorrow. Goodbye.